Hello. So I decided to do a review of Disney's 2022 live action remake of Pinocchio. This movie was interesting, for sure. I actually want to give a little bit of background as to my perspective going into this movie. I went in with no expectations. Before seeing the movie, I had purposely stayed away from the trailer. I didn't look at any reviews, any videos, any articles. I tried to stay away from as much promotional material as I could. I did not want to be influenced in any way about this movie. I wanted to just go and see it and enjoy it for what it was. And it had actually been a really long time since I had seen the original as well. Now, I do have a very good memory for movies, especially animated movies. I retain them very well, but it was not fresh on my mind. I had not seen the cartoon in years. So that was my foundation for going into this movie. I really didn't have any expectations, and I was looking forward to just being able to enjoy it for what it was and not have other things in my head fighting, trying to compare it to anything while watching it. I was hoping just to enjoy it for what it was. But there wasn't a lot of enjoying that happened. I still haven't watched any other reviews that people have done on it, so I have no idea what other people have said, but I can say for myself personally that this was one of the biggest letdowns in the remakes that Disney has done so far. All of their remakes to some degree have been very cash grabby or uninspired, apart from Cinderella, of course, but this one might be the worst of the bunch. The whole time it felt so uninspired. It felt like there was no spirit behind it or motivation. It just really felt like a cash grab. It felt so shallow, so hollow, so empty. It was pretty disappointing. Now let's dive a little bit deeper and break it down a little bit more. Let's start at the very beginning. So this movie opened, really, the main first scene was with Geppetto, and oh gosh, it was such a bad start. Like, you would think having Tom Hanks as being the main character in the scene, like, it would have worked, working with, like, no other characters in the room. He would have been able to handle that since he had done, like, Castaway, where all he was working off was Wilson, the volleyball. But somehow that did not translate through to this movie. It felt like he was talking to inanimate objects. It felt like he was talking to nothing sometimes. It felt like he was talking to himself a lot of the time. And I was disappointed with how much of what he was saying was mumbling. I had a hard time understanding what he was saying.
I may never find this vision in my mind.
And his accent. What the heck was going on with his accent? Like, I kept ping-ponging back and forth during his whole first opening bit, wondering, like, wait. Okay, is he trying to do an accent? Or is he just, like, bringing a unique kind of sound to this character that he was doing? I couldn't make up my mind until another character walked in the door and started using an accent. And I was like, oh, he's trying to do an accent. I think it's an Italian accent, right? Yeah, from then on out, I was just distracted with his accent. I really expected better from Tom Hanks. I tried to, like, briefly go and find some behind the scenes to see what he was working with, if it was just like a tennis ball he was talking at, or if they had like a puppet, some sort of stand-in, and I couldn't really find anything. So I don't know what the room looked like that he was in. I don't know what he had to work off of, but whatever they tried, whatever they did, it really didn't work in my opinion. I do like how they made it seem like he had lost a son and he was kind of trying to replace that in a way. I don't remember if that was in the original, and I don't know if that was from the book, but it felt nice, like having the picture of his lost son there while he was carving this new one. Like, I liked that. I thought that was sweet, and it mostly worked for what they were trying to go for. So what I actually said wasn't quite accurate, where I said Geppetto wasn't a great introduction to this movie. It didn't start the movie off well. That's not completely true, because the movie actually starts with Jiminy Cricket. And that was hard seeing and hearing what they did with Jiminy, especially his design. And this is going to lead me talking into the subject of just animals in general in this movie, but I want to start with Jiminy, where it was just like, from the get-go, seeing that right off the bat just made me question what direction this movie was going in, because they made it look like the cartoon, which honestly, the cartoon does not look a whole lot like a real cricket, like at all. And so for them to completely abandon reality and just go with basing it very obviously off of the cartoon was pretty jarring to me, didn't make a lot of sense, and made me question where the movie was headed. I had a really hard time buying that character in this setting. Now for the other most jarring animals in this movie is Honest John and the cat that he's with. I forget his name. I understand that they were pulling from the source material. They are animals in the storybook, I'm pretty sure, and in the original cartoon, of course. But not thinking about those things, like while I was watching the movie, those things weren't on my mind. I was just watching this movie as it was, and having two animals suddenly come up that were dressed like humans, talking like humans, walking like humans, proportions were like humans, felt so random. There were no other animals like that. The only other animals that we've seen in the movie so far really are like Figaro, his cat, and his goldfish, which are like, sure, they have personalities more so than a normal animal, but they are obviously animals. The cat is walking on all fours and isn't wearing clothes and can't talk. That's the universe that has been established thus far. So to have these two characters, in my opinion, it would have made a lot more sense to, instead of having them be animals, make them people. Sure, you would be veering away from the source material, I'm pretty sure, but it would have made more sense for this movie. Doing it in live action, you're trying to convince your audience to believe that this world is real. It's different than cartoons and storybooks. And they should have adapted it for that medium of live action. Instead of making them walking, talking, well-dressed animals, make them people. That's just my opinion. I felt like those two characters were so random, and I wish they had just made them into humans. So those are my thoughts for most of the animals. I could talk about the bird talking, which, I don't know, that didn't really bother me because it only talked to other animals, so whatever. And the whale, I actually did like the design of the beast. I don't know if Monstro, what it is in the original book, but I liked how it was more sea monstery than it was a whale. I liked that change. I liked that design. Moving on through the story, going on to the puppet show. I could talk about this scene for a long time. There's a lot of stuff to discuss from this scene. First off, just looking at the villain, what is it, Stromboli, I think is his name, who owns the puppet show and recruited Pinocchio to be part of his show. He was not scary enough. I remember, bits about the original cartoon, and that character is one of the biggest parts that stuck with me because of how terrifying he is. Like when he's threatening Pinocchio, throws the axe, cutting up these puppets right in front of him and threatening to use them as firewood, I think is what he does, right? Terrifying. And in this one, he just wasn't. Like, it was a bit of a letdown. And then moving on to talking about this other character that they introduced at the puppet show that's supposed to be like a friend or an ally to Pinocchio, the like ballerina character. I don't even remember her name, but all in all, I'll put a picture and her name here up on the screen. I don't even remember what it was. But she was one of the most pointless parts of this movie. Really, if you think about it, if you take out her character, her and her puppet, from the movie, it doesn't change anything at all. She has the little discussion with him behind the scenes before the first puppet show happens, but Pinocchio still does the puppet show. She has a little chat with him when, she's talking about getting him out of there and helping him escape, but she doesn't help him escape. She has a conversation later on with him, talking about how they're free now and Pinocchio should come with them and do the show with them, but Pinocchio doesn't do that. Her character's completely pointless in my eyes. I don't see a reason for them to have added her in. I get that they want to add new stuff in, maybe try, to add more messages or whatever, but like that one just fell flat. Okay, moving on, the last thing I want to touch on, I think, from that scene for now is how Pinocchio uses his nose when lying to get the key. What? He realized that the lying has a potential to be able to get him out of his crappy situation, and so he continues to lie to be able to get the key. What kind of message are you sending here? Like, I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know if they were thinking like, oh, we're not sending a message, like he's being resourceful, like good on him, whatever. It's like, no, you are sending a very clear message that lying is okay if it is helping you out of your situation. Yeah, that doesn't look very good. It was ridiculous that he used lying as a tool to get what he wanted, and there were no repercussions for that, and it actually did help save the day for him. He did get out that way. Ridiculous. Alright, let's go a little bit more broad for a moment here. I want to talk about just like the character of Pinocchio in general through the whole movie. I didn't care about him, like, at all. through the whole movie, he was so passive, so boring. Like, he was just going with whatever the last person said to him. Like, he was just doing whatever people told him. There was no real personality traits shining through to make me feel, be like endearing or make me sympathize with him. Like, I just didn't care about him. Like, going back to the puppet show is a good example. Like, I do remember in the original cartoon, because I've seen clips throughout my life, you can't ignore the puppet show scene, is like, he has so much personality coming through, where you can see he like wants to be impressive, but then like has moments of uncertainty and self-consciousness, but then he'll gain confidence for a little bit, but you see him stumbling. Like, it's very endearing, and it's fun to watch him learning about the world and like having new experiences. But in this one, like, I just didn't feel any of that. He was just going with the flow, doing what he was told, going through the motions. And that was such a huge thing through the entire movie, with every character and every moment, was I felt like it was just going through the motions. Everything just felt so empty. And like later on when he's at Pleasure Island, like, this is something that didn't make sense to me either. It's supposed to be a born yesterday situation, right? And that's why he needs a conscious assigned to him with Jiminy Cricket, because he doesn't know anything about this world. He doesn't know right from wrong, basically, right? That's the point. He needs to learn those things and become better. But at Pleasure Island, he doesn't have Jiminy Cricket with him there, but he feels guilty. And like, I feel like he is very clearly discerning right from wrong. So what's the point of having a conscience? What's the point of Jiminy Cricket if Pinocchio for himself can be telling right from wrong? I don't know, was that supposed to be character development? But then why did he turn into a donkey? I don't know, because I'm pretty sure in the original cartoon he was like engaging with all of the bad activities, right? And like enjoying it, I think. I don't know, while I'm editing this video, I'll probably be looking through old footage from the original movie and I'll stumble across something that proves my point. But anyway, all that to say, I feel like the main character that this movie was named for, Pinocchio, just was a very hollow character that I didn't care about, and it was very disappointing. Oh, and if you're gonna cast Luke Evans in your musical, you might want to cast other people that are at his caliber, because when you keep putting Luke Evans in your musicals and he just outshines everyone, I think you're making a mistake, because he's stealing the show. Okay, now I want to kind of cover the ending and talk about if or what the message of this movie might have been trying to be. So I only kind of vaguely remember the ending details from the original, so I don't really have that to compare it to. So just looking at this movie, I felt like there were some parts that were okay and other parts that weren't. Like, I'm okay that Pinocchio saves Geppetto and everyone, like, fine. It was a little bit too superhero-y for me, but it was fine. But like, Pinocchio crying? A couple things with that. First off, how? He's made of wood. I don't understand how that is supposed to be working, or what the significance behind that is supposed to be. Is that implying that he's done what he's supposed to? That he has met the requirements that the fairy gave to him? I don't understand how this block of wood is crying. But then also, like, I don't know, I think if I remember correctly, at least in the cartoon, I don't know what it is in the book, but like, doesn't he like sacrifice himself for Geppetto? Doesn't he like die? And in a lot of stories and in a lot of movies, that's like the ultimate selfless act, right? To like prove your worthiness, whatever, is to sacrifice yourself. And so, like, for him to just motor them into the cave, like, good on you, but like, was that enough? I don't know. I feel like it could have been more powerful, and it wasn't. And then the whole thing with him not turning into a boy. I've been racking my brain over the past day or two here since I've watched it, like, what the significance of that was. I feel like there was supposed to be a message in there, like, oh, you don't need this to be that sort of a thing, but like, I haven't figured out what that's supposed to be. I feel like there were a lot of messages that this movie could have gone with, like whatever it is the fairy tells him to be.
You have to prove that you are brave, truthful, and unselfish.
How do I do that?
Well, by learning to choose between right and wrong.
Lean into that. Or they could have really like focused in on a message of like not having your head turned by outside influences and voices, like trusting yourself, or I don't know, something along those lines, because Jiminy Cricket specifically says to him when after he talked to Honest John,
Honest John? Pinocchio, as a rule of thumb, when somebody calls themselves honest, they ain't.
they could have made that the message of the movie. And there's several other directions they could have gone, and I feel like they didn't do any of them. And so the ending just felt very hollow and open, like it just ended, and that we were just supposed to accept it and just be like, oh, okay, I guess this is how it is. But there was no reason behind any of it. To me, I did not see any motivations, reasoning, or anything that made sense for the decisions they made of how to end this movie. All right, the last thing that I want to touch on just to finish up this video is just talking about, like, why remake this movie? Oftentimes there are many reasons to remake a movie. And of all of the Disney animated movies in the past, I have said I feel like the old ones that like Walt worked on probably are the ones that lend themselves best to modern remakes, because those really were made for very different reasons, for very different audiences. I feel like there is quite a bit that could be changed or added to be appealing to audiences of today. And so I felt like they could have done stuff with Pinocchio, but they didn't. This felt like such an empty cash grab that had no spirit behind it. Like the movie makers, I'm seriously curious to know if they wanted to do this and what their reason was, because I see no reason for them to have made this final product that they presented to us. And one major thing I would like to touch on is the medium. I think that there are certain stories that are best told in certain mediums and in certain ways. Some stories belong in book form, where we are able to go at our own pace, get a lot of history, backstory, world building, whatever, while visual mediums can be another. Anything from theater, making plays, that is one way to tell stories that is completely different from doing things on screen. And even doing things on screen, you can do things in TV form, episodic with episodes, or in feature film form, having full-length movies. And even within that, doing animated, doing live action, doing CG, doing stop motion, there are so many ways to tell stories, and I think it is important to find the best fitting method for the story that you're trying to tell. And the one for Pinocchio, I do not think that live action is the right way to tell this story. Storybook form makes sense, right? Book, picture book, that makes perfect sense for this story. Animated form, I think, makes a lot of sense, because you are able to make the real people and the objects and other bizarre characters fit together in the same world because they are the same medium, and so it all feels very cohesive and like they belong together, and their interactions feel very natural and believable. And that's one reason that I think Del Toro's Pinocchio coming out later this year actually might be pretty good, because doing it stop motion, making everything the same medium, I believe will make it more cohesive. And they changed up the design of Pinocchio, which I think was very smart. Making it this Disney version a copy paste from the animated cartoon, I think, was a mistake, because like every time he would have expressions, I was just confused, and I was so distracted by like the emotions they were trying to make him have. If they have carved in some sort of brow on him, then when it moved I would have been like, okay, but they gave him a completely flat carved face, so anytime he had like puckerings, I was just like, how? You're made of wood. When that is 2D animated, it's so much more believable, because in that medium you can take hard objects and make them all squishy and like stretchy, and you don't think twice about it. And so I believe that this story really probably does not belong well in a live action form. So there you have it. There's my review of this remake that Disney did here in 2022. I was surprised at how disappointed I was. I thought they would change something to improve it and make it enjoyable for modern audiences and in live action form, but nope. Thanks for sticking with me through this video and listening to me rant about this movie. I hope you enjoyed yourself at least a little bit, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.